Welcome to another episode of Honest to Pod, the podcast where each week we pick something to ramble on about. Current events,
Personal growth,
women's issues,
and job hunting. I'm Ashley McAllister,
and I'm Matthew Ali.
and this is episode 19.
99 problems, but there ain't one. I should rap, you're right.
Is that not encouraging racial stereotypes?
If I rap?
Yeah.
I guess so. I don't even know if I can rap. We used to do it in school. It was a big thing when we turned to like year 8, year 9, so 12 or 13, where people used to write down lyrics, and obviously I did the same thing, so I used to write down raps as well.
I think rather than rap, you should do maybe Irish jig.
I think that'd be really hard on the calves. I've got very small calves.
Okay.
Although, I don't know if you remember, there's something happened recently, and it's interesting that you say that. I don't think we mentioned it, but there's this black girl in America who does Irish dancing, and she's really, really good, and she loves it. She got a lot of flack saying that she appropriates Irish culture because she does Irish dancing, and there were levels to it because one, they were saying like you don't even know what her background is. You assume that because she's black, she doesn't have any ancestry or heritage. They didn't know her actual background, one, and they don't know the environment that she grew up in or where she was. But I thought that it was ridiculous.
I mean, I agree with you. The world is PC crazy at the minute, so you can't do anything right for not pissing off somebody over here. So I give up. I fuck it. Do what you want. Excellent. Do what makes you happy, as long as you're not hurting or killing anyone. But no, I think Irish dancing is a form of art, and I think it can be expressed by whomever desires.
She said she was celebrating it or respecting it. She was celebrating it. She works really hard at it. Do you know what I mean? She wasn't mocking it. She's an incredible Irish dancer.
How are you, my dear?
Oh, sorry.
I got in there first.
Jigs, do you see that in school? Jigs,
and then you can speak. It would be a really dull podcast if we didn't speak.
My week, do you know what? I wanted to talk about a little bit because I've had a really tough couple of days, or like the past week, really, really bad. And I did want to mention it because now that I'm not having like my therapy sessions, and we've said before, this podcast can be like a little bit like a therapy kind of thing. Last week, Thursday, when the episode came out.
Yeah.
And it wasn't related to that. I don't know what it was, but all of a sudden I got this like mad wave of like, anxiety, and it's still really here like now at the moment. And it was quite embarrassing, like in myself. I was a bit like petty and a bit ashamed because like I suddenly felt really jealous of people that were doing well, and then I related that to me like not doing well. And I feel like over the past year, like in the long term, not having work but keeping busy, I have done really well. But for whatever reason in that moment, I was just like, oh, everybody's doing really well. And I'd see things on social media, which we talk about later, or people, they're winning awards or they're getting this. And I was just like racked of absolute jealousy. And I was then ashamed because I was like, I don't really like jealousy as like a trait anyway, but just how petty I felt as well. So then, yeah, it's kind of stuck now for like the past 5 or 6 days. And I'm like, oh, it needs to go now.
I mean, don't beat yourself up too much, my love, because we can't control our emotions. All we can control is how we respond to them. So it's okay that you're jealous. I'd say it's the next level would be it's not okay to sit and attack people. So you didn't do that. No. It's fine. Emotions are natural, normal, and it's I get jealous of people all the time. I'm jealous of your skin. I'm not going to sit and see it come and rip it off your face.
It's just the ring light. It's just the ring light.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's okay. I mean, you've had a tough year. You've had a testing year, and I think you've done well. I'm not just saying that here because you're asked, because our listeners know that I'd come for you if I could. But you've had a great year. Well, no, you've not had a great year. You've done well this year because it's nearly been a year since you've actually fucking had work, and you've always grown up somebody who works. Like you love it. You love to work. And it's just like I can imagine how shit. I've been out of work now for 2 months, and I am depressed. Like I would hands up say that there's moments I've had great things that happened to me in the last 2 months. But there's times where I just sit and I can't get out of bed.
I'm really struggling to get out of bed at the moment.
I'm in bed
Like,
now.
well, but in the morning, like one thing I pride myself on is like, okay, I've said it. I set my alarm. I get up at my alarm. I'm
Yeah.
setting my alarm, and then an hour and a half later, I'm still in bed, and I'm lying there, and I'm just like, I don't want to move.
Mm.
And then I'm worried. It's mad. I don't know if it's mad, but because I'm in my family home, then it gets to a point where it's like quite late for me in my head, and then I start feeling like guilty because I'm in bed and I can hear like my mum walking around, and I'm like, oh fuck, I don't want to get up, and then she sees that I've only just woken up, and it's only 10 o'clock. Well, not only it's 9:30 normally, but in my head I'm like, oh, I've just, I fucked up really
Yeah.
bad or something, and it's just weird. Like it's really strange.
Well, I mean, I've not been in bed all day to be honest. I got up, had a job interview this morning, so fingers crossed for that.
I fucking hate
Um,
you.
what? No,
I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm
no.
joking. I'm joking. I've got a job
Don't
into on
be,
Thursday. To be fair.
don't be jealous of me. And then I went for a walk. Took the dog I live with out for a walk, and then came back. And then my housemate Trev forced me to do exercise because he said it will snap me out of my little depressed state. He very kindly sent me a message over the weekend asking if I was all right because he seemed he sensed I was a bit down, and yeah, I've been a bit down, but like I said, I've lots of great things happened to me this year so far. And it just literally has worked now, and I think it's because of the lack of routine. I've injured my shoulder, and I'm putting on a shitload of weight. Don't you roll your eyes at me. I injured my shoulder, and I've also injured my back, and yeah, so it was nice today to do a little bit of exercise, break a little bit of sweat.
No, I think we
Mm.
both when you did that because I went for a run and came back and saw you did exercise, and I was like, oh shit, we've both done something out of nowhere. So
Yeah,
I think that's part of it. My exercise has been out of whack the past like 3 weeks, and
yeah,
it does feed into it. And it's so weird because obviously it's like the result and the cause in a way. Because I'm not exercising, I'm feeling down. I'm feeling down, so I won't exercise, and it's a stupid cycle.
it's a horrible cycle. Yeah,
I know you can say that you've had loads of good things happen, but you posted something on Instagram today, and I was like, oh, okay.
yeah, I know. Yeah, so I've got myself one of those little boyfriend things. I see other people have them, so I thought I'll get myself one. It's been a time, so yeah, I'm it sounds so corny, but I'm really happy with everything. So I'm
That's good.
welling up a little bit, but
Ah.
yeah, no, I'm just super happy. Super happy.
So today we've got another guest on, and we've got our very, very first. I can't even say the
I,
words. So, w- this is impossible to say.
I don't even know what the word is. I can't spell it.
It is. It ends with men. That's the bit I
That's the
know,
bit I
men.
like. Yeah,
But
yeah.
she's our very
The rest
first
doesn't matter.
woe men. So we've got very first woe men.
Wolfman.
I'm reading it here, and honestly, I've never seen this before in my life. Yeah. So we've got our very first woe men on today's podcast. So she's.
I hope that this is not us shoehorning in women's issues into the podcast.
I would never.
I
would
don't.
never.
I would,
I
100%.
would never. Absolutely not. I would never do such a thing. So in celebration of International Women's Day, which is on March the 8th, and then this year the theme is hashtag choose to challenge. A challenged world is an alert world, and from challenges comes change. So let's all choose to challenge. How will you help forge a gender equal world? Celebrate women's achievement. Raise awareness against bias. Take action for equality. And then we said it off the podcast, but actually it's going to be the start of International Women's Awareness Month, and that I only saw that today, so I hadn't written down the actual word, but yeah, so that's going to be a good thing. So they actually are going to get a whole month dedicated to them, which I don't know why or how.
I don't think they need it.
I don't think so. I'm glad Tora's not here.
Tora, obviously we joke, and she'll be joining us in just a second. But before we get into that, I just want to look at. So obviously last week we talked about that charming review that we got. I had a little bit of a vent online because I was just thinking about it, and you know me, I like to be juicy. But to give some credit where it's due. We obviously understand that that's just one person's opinion, and obviously they're entitled to it. And I'm sorry that we've disappointed you in this, but we will continue to be loyal to what we think is true. And some of our listeners have got in touch. I had after the post I posted the other day on Instagram, we got very positive messages on
On the socials,
so
just in general.
I couldn't say the word social. I just kept seeing that woman word, and I was like,
the whoa man.
I can't get my tongue around
whoa man.
it. Oh, I have a weak stomach.
I know.
So one of our dear listeners has updated their. He listening from the start. God love him. I mean, his name is DazX2000. I think that's the year he was born.
I always wonder why it's Daz. I want to know what the Daz is though.
It's his favorite washing powder. Obviously that bitch wasn't born in 2000, but I love you for leaving this really nice review. A light-hearted look at the issues of today with an LGBT plus angle. Worth a listen. Updated quite recently to say this has become so much more slick and professional. Loving the mix of guests and topics. Appointment listening for me. So thank you very much for going back in and leaving an updated review. And then we also had a lovely review from Jess98, and I probably would not be harmed in thinking that actually is the year she was born. 5 stars, God love her. She's entertaining and educational, and she gives a little chef's kiss, like that. I really enjoyed both the contemporary and historical content of this podcast, especially in the episodes where you've used your platform to voice untold stories of the past. I have laughed and cried in the short 4 weeks that I have re-tuned in. I love that you have guests on your show, and I find it exciting to hear new perspectives. I'm learning so much, LOL. Also feel like I want to give credit to how kind and supportive you are of your guests' own projects and podcasts. I have started listening to the logbook since hearing about it through episode 96. I look forward to next week's episode, and congrats on reaching 100. Jess, kiss kiss.
Do you know, a fair few people have gone on to listen to logbooks, and it is genuinely incredible. Did you know that they were just nominated for another award?
They deserve it. As is Crystals. Crystals, who we also promoted, is also a great podcast.
Oh, God, so good.
Yeah.
I was upset there was only 6 episodes, but I think it was to see how it would go, and then they'll do more. So, it feels like there should be more episodes.
But, Matt, reviews is just one way that you can support the podcast. Is that right? Not right?
So, yeah, there's loads of ways that you can. So, we want you to share, give us feedback, which is absolutely important, and obviously 5 stars is incredible. Apple Podcasts you can do it on. Do you know, I never understood why Spotify don't have it. Do you know if there's a reason why?
I guess they just never did it for music, and
you can share. So if you ever want to just say that you're listening to a wonderful episode, then putting on Instagram stories, sharing some of our posts that we release on Thursday and Monday with the episode title is also something you can do. And the more people that reaches, that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for growth, and we're looking for reach at the moment. So that would really be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The other way that you can support us is, like we always say, this is a conversational podcast. Join in the conversations. Give us your opinions. Leave comments on the stuff we post. You know, coming up on Monday, we have Matt versus our lovely guest, Tora, on what top 5 crisps they think are the best. You can tell Matt how wrong he is on every single one, if that's your liking to do so. But if you're feeling a little bit more generous and not so much chatty, then you can go on to Patreon and support us through Patreon. Patreon is a lovely little safe website that people use to donate to creative outlets such as our own, and we have 3 little tiers on there. Matt, do you know the name of the 3 tiers?
I do. So we've got the basic P,
which is it's fine. It's fine to be basic. No, a nice
much
little...
like Tora's choices of crisps. They're basic. Very basic.
Wow. Right. Okay. What else?
We have the bougie P.
You're bougie. I can tell you're bougie.
Yeah. So if you got a little bit of flair, a little bit of flavor, a little bit of coin, but not too much, then you can support us by being a bougie P.
Or my favorite tier.
Your favorite tier, and you've got one now, which is a sugar daddy tier. So, if you're feeling a little bit more generous, Ash and I, we don't have a job,
We don't have a job.
isn't it? I'll suck your dick for a sugar daddy tier.
I won't go that low. I'm more bougie than basic, but
That'll fulfill 2 needs I have right now. Then you can generously donate to our Patreon, and as you said, we want to grow. One of the things that we look to do is to advertise and expand our reach, and that will really help us towards doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Think of Patreon as OnlyFans, but no naked content.
We've just got our open naked voices.
Oh. Do you know, my other half said I had the voice of an angel. Falling angel. I missed out that word.
A voice like an angel. Oh my god. That's sweet.
All right, I think we should get Tora in because I'm excited about hearing what she's got to talk about.
Yes, so thank you everyone, and let's hear from our lovely friend of the podcast, Tora Abrahams. Welcome back, everyone, and as we said before, we've got Tora with us. Hello, Tora.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Matt and Ash.
Hey. Welcome.
Hey, first time I'm meeting you both. Oh, and thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. Our pleasure.
We don't actually know each other, which is obviously funny, because I feel like I do. I think we've been chatting for like a whole year in some way, but yeah, we just don't know each other.
Well, where's the year gone? And I've seen you on Zoom quizzes, courtesy of our mutual friend, John, and then... through chatting about this.
We're not allowed to talk about those quizzes.
Not
John.
Oh, are we not?
No, because Ashley wasn't invited and he got very, very upset.
I'll tell you this, right?
Ashley.
That little, and I won't use the word, but he promised me.
Were you going to say the N word?
Of course I wasn't going to say the N word.
He was like, that little... No.
He said, no, I'm not going to say it. That's what he started to say. Oh, wow.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and all that jazz?
So, as you said, my name's Tora, also known as Victoria, but never a Vicky, thanks to my parents. And I am from Manchester. I am in my 30s, and I am a raving feminist, and that's what I do all day, every day. I work to support women and girls and people who menstruate mostly. But my background is in working for people who have disadvantages in different communities. So people who have vulnerabilities, people who don't have access to services. And traditionally, for me, that started off in a legal context. And then I moved to the charity sector. And from there, I do a little bit of both still. And I'm happy to talk more about what that means for me, or just to shut up, because as we both talked about, I do a lot of different things still.
Well, how did you get into working into charities? And would you say activist? What would be like the correct word for you to use?
Yeah, I do consider myself an activist, a campaigner, someone who, I guess the definition for me is like an actively advocating for someone's needs or right to be recognised on a broader scale. And activism today is wonderful because it can take shape in many different platforms, many different arenas. Like, you only really need access to a network of people to be able to call yourself an activist or do something that's trying to invoke change, reframe a conversation, spark a conversation. So that's who I've always been, I think. Like, I remember my mum saying to me when I was a lot younger that I've just always been someone who was recognised, like, should I say, like, in a very like basic term, like an injustice, and wanted to rectify that injustice. My background is from my father's side, like I'm second generation apartheid South African immigrant. So a big thing for me is looking to address like inequality in a racial sense. And I think that side of me, because I exist because of a racially oppressive government, like that for me is a driver in terms of why I am an activist in what I do. So I've always gone towards work which is geared at looking at the underrepresented people, looking at people who are oppressed. How do I look to support them, but also questioning systems and structures that are creating or perpetuating that oppression. So
I mean, we have to be really careful. We got a feedback last week that said that we might shoehorn race issues and trans issues a bit too much. So I don't want you to talk too much about race, please,
it's
because
mad, isn't
we've said
it?
enough. It's been done, babe. It's been done.
It's
Don't
been done. What
like
lives
we
matter is
can-
a 2020 thing, guys. Can we leave that in the?
Yeah, can we just only
Honestly.
talk about white people in this episode? Is that all right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm half of that, so I will definitely do the 50%. It's a shame that people still think like this. I think like you guys have always said, and like this is part of your niche as a podcast, right? Like the fact that it is supporting people from LGBT backgrounds, people who are genderqueer, people who are underrepresented, and like that is people from African and Caribbean backgrounds. And you know, Matt is here to represent that as well. So I mean, if you can't stand that in 2021, why are you listening to podcasts? Like it's clearly not for education. So
yeah, no. We said we're not going to stop talking about any issues, and it'll be quite interesting. I think when we go on, when you talk about feminism as one, this will be the first time that you talk about women's issues with a woman. You are the very first female to ever grace this podcast. Yeah, definitely is. You should be proud of yourself, but maybe we should be ashamed.
oh guys, oh no, don't say that. I
Maybe
mean,
we should be.
can I ask, so then I know that obviously it's because it's in line with us celebrating International Women's Day next week, but do you know like why you haven't had a woman on before? Like,
I do. I don't know any women.
I don't know any women.
I don't know any.
Funny.
My
That
mom
is
would not
so
come
funny.
on. She wouldn't come on.
Pretty
Oh,
much.
bless.
Yeah, so we've stuck to issues that because the podcast has always been really about us and exploring ourselves, right? Which I guess is, I don't want to say it's a self-centered thing to do, but I think many people can relate to it in some ways. And I guess a lot of that's been driven by. So the issues and things that we talk about, and not just issues, but just news in general, are really things that are just around us, that we surround ourselves. As we've got more guests on this year and have started to, for want of a better word, because I don't really like it, but I think it's important to network. I think we started to reach out a bit more and really understand that for us, we need to and want to explore outside of what we just have. Because I only know gay men, right? Cisgender gay men is pretty much where I'm at. That's it. I don't want to say it's not right because like you're a product of your environment and it's you're surrounded by all that sort of stuff. But I just think for me, it will take more of an effort and a recognition to go out of that circle.
I really appreciate you saying that actually, because I think as well for me, it can be really hard as someone who, again, frame of reference, I absolutely love talking about women's issues, female issues, periods being one big thing of that. And it's taken, like, John's one of my closest friends, I class him as a brother. And it's taken us, like, we're in sort of like the 8th year of our friendship for him to be comfortable about me talking about my period issues with him, because it's such, do you know what I mean? So I think for me, the fact that you've asked me on here, knowing full well that a big part of my day work is advocating for menstrual equity and, screaming about periods as much as I can so that people and girls and women across the world feel confident about that. Like, that's a big step for you. And it's a big step generally for people to start thinking about the importance of the female experience, because that for me is a big part of my feminism, like really normalizing what we go through and how different kind of our life experience is based on what we internally go through and individually, but also how the world sees us.
Well, I'd never even heard of period poverty, so I guess we'll talk about sort of the charity that you work for, because the big thing that happened is, I don't know what we were talking, I was talking to another mutual friend, Robbie, and he'd mentioned Tora and period poverty, and I thought he'd made up that term, or is it a joke term? And I thought he was just making like light of it, but that's an actual thing. Ashley, have you heard of it before?
No, I think I've understood the concept, but I've never heard of the actual term.
What's the charity that well, I mean, I went to an all boys school. That's the thing. I went to an all boys school. My house is my mum and 4 boys, and her, I guess not saying too much stuff, but just with my mum, and she had us at quite a later age. During the years that I would really understand what they were, I think she had passed that stage where she was regularly going through that. So it wasn't a point. And then the first women I met, I was 16 and I went to sixth form college, and people didn't talk about it then. And I still didn't really understand what the girls were saying when they said they had it. But so why don't you tell us a little bit about your charity and what is it that you do?
The history of Freedom for Girls, and like where we kind of coined the name period poverty, is that the founder, my colleague Tina, was actually in Kenya. And this is probably why we have this quite a lot when we get feedback about why the concept of period poverty isn't well known in the UK, because most people say it is, you can imagine it happening in developing countries where the sort of infrastructure for, say, period products just isn't available. So Tina started the projects in Kenya. She was working on a mother and baby unit and was told that a lot of the women who were postpartum, so who have similar kind of experiences in terms of needing products after they've had babies, like they weren't getting access to them. And so it started with us partnering with a small charity there who were making the washable, reusable pads. And then Tina came back to the UK and was like, this is what I've done. It's so amazing. And her day job is in public health. And she works a lot with schools. And a teacher said to Tina then, this was at the back end of 2016, a teacher said to Tina, that's great, but did you know that similar issues are happening here? So I've got 4 or 5 girls in one of my classes who I know every month for 3 or 4, 5 days, they are not coming to school because they don't want to risk like basically leaking on their school uniform, being uncomfortable while sat in a classroom because they don't have access to period products. Tina was thinking, like, I know that austerity has really hit a lot of families really badly. I know that in Leeds alone, 250,000 people are accessing food banks on an annual basis. If you can't afford bread, how are you going to be able to afford period products, right? So she kind of set to work by knocking on the doors of some big period product providers, like the big brands that you might have heard of, like Always. I'm trying to think of some others now, but they're gone out of my head, obviously. And she said to say again.
Is it Body Form? Is that one?
Yes, thank you, Ashley. I'm going to get in trouble for that actually because they're one of our partners. It's because I've converted to washable, reusable products, so I don't buy disposables anymore. But anyway, that's my only excuse.
I can hear the theme song in my head. That's the only reason of it. Oh, Body Form, Body Form for me.
It's the media. That's the media brand.
My marketing mind is like, we need a jingle. We need a jingle in here.
Brilliant. But yeah, so she started to shout about it on that kind of level, like, can any of you companies who are massive corporates and can afford to donate some products, can you support in donating products? And she just got big doors closed in her face. There was no belief that this was an actual issue. Plan International, a massive NGO that work internationally but have a UK base, did some baseline data at the end of 2017 after hashtag free periods became something that the activist community was running across social media. And their research discovered that 1 in 10 girls was not adequately managing their periods well. And what they meant by not adequately managing periods wasn't just due to lack of access or affordability of products. It was poor menstrual health education, and it was the stigmas and the shame and the taboos that exist around periods, such that girls didn't know how to support themselves or ask for support. So yeah, that 2017 was a big year for the activist community around free periods and why period poverty became a thing. But we didn't really get taken seriously until, say, 2018, 2019. And that's when the government kind of woke up and they started to listen to the campaign. And that's how we then supported the development of free products in schools in January last year. So small baby steps have been made, but overall, I mean, Ashley, like, to make you feel better, even in the world of period poverty that's become quite trendy and topical in the last few years, even funders and stakeholders who do women's and girls support, they generally turn down applications that say period poverty because it doesn't resonate with them. So they'd much rather we say things like disadvantaged women and girls or unable to afford products, if that makes sense, because it's still very much like a non-buzzword, really, which is sad.
Well, I've noticed, like, just I remember over lockdown there was an advert that came on. I can't remember what it was on. I'm sure I was watching football at Mickey's house.
Shut up! You're watching football.
I didn't want to watch it. I was at Mickey's house. I was watching the football, wasn't it? And I'm sure there was an advert. And I remember both Mickey and me were like, "Did that just come on TV?" And I just remember the woman, it was like a talk show, and she's talking about being comfortable, and she's like, make sure you shove it on up there, girls. And I was just like, oh, what? What's it mean? But to me, it was like, it seemed like a positive step forward in terms of just normalizing things, because, you know, in my opinion, it should be normalized. We shouldn't be sitting here. And, you know, sometimes, you know, I'll put my hands up and say in the past, quite regularly, I'd be like, please don't talk about that. It's not really for me, but it's my own, that's a flaw in me. And I get that. So I think we need to step forward and make these things, because there's no point in shaming people into a natural body function.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. There's some really good artwork, actually. So trying to pass the message off in a accessible and like pleasurable medium is there's a few artists that do things like just take the piss out of the idea that men are really comfortable with blood via violence on TV, for example, but they're not good at looking at blood on a period pad. So, for example, you'll like Always for me is a big brand to revert to because they coined the whole showing blue water going onto a pad just to show its like absorbency. Have you ever seen blood on a TV with a period pad? Like you haven't, because it doesn't exist. But I mean, it's the most natural form of non-violent related blood that exists across the world. Like we all exist because periods happen, and yet everyone is pretty much uncomfortable to recognize that they are a thing. The sad part of that is that, you know, as a privileged woman living in the West, like I still have issues around my menstrual cycle. So not just to do with the 4 or 5 days that I bleed every month, but the whole cycle is a lot for women at different points because we go through fluctuations. There's a period that we ovulate where you have similar symptoms, and all of that, it took me to get into my 30s to be comfortable and aware of what that experience was, to really navigate my own identity and my own body and so on. But the reverse end of that, which is so much worse than the extreme, is that the less we talk about these things, like women are still really suffering, are abused for things like this. They're dying because of it. I don't know if you know that in Nepal they have menstrual huts. So women are banned from their communities, their homes, being around their families when they bleed. And in winter times, because they are far up in the mountains and the smoke inhalation is the smoke, what's the word I'm looking for? Aeration is really, really poor in these huts. They have to build fires, and a lot of times the women, I think 3 or 4 times in 2019, women had been found dead in the huts because they died from the smoke fumes. And another young woman from Kenya had committed suicide because she was publicly shamed by a teacher in school because she'd stained her skirt from a period. So that is the extreme version of things, and I don't really like to talk on behalf of the communities where I'm not part of their culture and so on, but simultaneously that is a stem of generally the fact that female health issues, and the biggest one that happens to most women and most regularly, is just something that, you know, the rest of the world doesn't want to deal with.
I would think, and it's mainly my assumptions, but maybe the people that listen to this podcast and the people that are similar to me, gay men and stuff, they would absolutely be lying to themselves if they said it's something they can engage with and talk with regularly, whether you're talking about the extremes or not. Like, it's just not something, it's just something that doesn't exist. So it's really important that not just the taboos and education goes to women and how they need to manage their own cycles, because something I kind of understand, you can help me with it because I cannot even guess what it might be like, but people suffer very differently, and some of them can be very, very painful, very uncomfortable, and really difficult to manage, and it ranges. But men need to understand as well that they need to understand that this happens, and that happens regularly, and this is something that you need to cater for. I know I became a manager of people, and there was a woman that worked, you know, I managed her. She was very open, which was really handy because I did not understand before I became a general manager that this was happening so regularly. And she was like, Matt, this person, that person, this is why they're going. And I was like, oh my God, I need to understand this, you know. And she was telling me what was happening with her, and I was like, thank you, because I don't want to just be like, why are you so tired? Or, you know, why do you keep going to the toilet or something? Do you know what I mean? So it's really important that men understand this.
I think so too. And it's really good that I know that I'm in a circle where, for example, I can say this quite openly, but also feel comfortable about this, because you feel wanting to provide that space for us, but it doesn't happen all the time. And I think we really do, we generally do appreciate these like kind of safe spaces where that opportunity for that kind of chat happens. But yeah, we've been part of Freedom for Girls recently, been part of some research around what it means to talk about your periods in the workplace, and symptoms that can occur. There's just so many, like you said, Matt, and people experience things differently. And when we live in a world of loads of things that disrupt our hormones, or, you know, like women having children at later stages in life and so on, I think it is a big conversation that I think needs a lot more normalizing. It doesn't have to be every day all the time, but just to kind of reiterate this need of understanding the experience will be really helpful. I think because that some of that research I just mentioned about normalizing periods in the workforce, it's 60-something% of women said they'd rather say they had food poisoning than the period pain. So they'd rather be like, I'm shitting myself than I actually got a period. So that for me is a big sign that we just don't we're just so embarrassed about our periods, which is sad.
Yeah, I recently listened to a podcast as well that was talking about, and I don't know if this is necessarily the same, but about talking about menopause in the workplace as well, because that also affects people's bodies and that needs to be managed. And potentially, and it isn't, but there should probably be a policy around what needs to happen over that process, because it is a long process that affects people in different ways again, and quite drastically in some ways. But again, it's not something that's spoken about. And is there anything you deal with in your work and or your charity?
Yeah, so we're running a project at the moment that's called Period Positive Spaces, and that is pretty much like what you just said in terms of menopause. We were really frustratingly approached in like February last year by a huge insurance broker that said that they'd done the menopause thing. So they'd written in a menopause policy into their kind of standard HR procedures and how to support their staff. They were asking, wanting to commission us to do something around period safety at work. Like, what would it look like in terms of being period friendly? How would we support people who menstruate? And yeah, then the lockdown happened and no one's in an office, so they didn't want to do it anymore. But our project's still going, and the aim of it is to kind of encourage organisations, businesses, public spaces, so even like academic institutions and supermarkets, sort of look at what would make them period positive. From like low level of a bronze stage to like providing products, having conversations, to what would it mean to have like a silver membership or a gold membership, to really, really address the need to positively encourage women and people who menstruate to feel good about their periods. So watch this space. That will hopefully be towards the summer. We'll have that fully out as a consultancy model for businesses and organisations.
I wanted to actually and I just heard you say it sort of, because we've spoken a lot about men and women and girls, and your charity is called Freedom for Girls. But I've heard recently the word people that menstruate, because it isn't necessarily related to just girls and women who menstruate. And do you have like a stance on that? Or is there a reason why Freedom for Girls is freedom for girls and women as opposed to people that menstruate in general?
We are trans inclusive. We had our policy approved by our board. I should say trans, genderqueer, non-gender conforming, non-binary people inclusive. Like our policy is about inclusivity of language. So we really want to push forward this narrative that, you know, language is finite, but also the reframing of that within this transitional period of trying to be more inclusive as a society is ongoing. So our kind of, what we like to say is our brand name is Freedom for Girls, and it happened because we were working with young women and girls in communities in East Africa, in which having conversations about not gender non-conforming, but people who don't identify as men or women, like those conversations just aren't as like relevant. They just don't happen as much, and we don't want to step away from that kind of brand. However, we absolutely represent way more than the communities that don't have these conversations where trans identity, gender non-conforming identities are relevant. So that being said, we're really passionate about being inclusive. We wouldn't want anyone who does menstruate to not feel like they can come to us for support. And simultaneously, anybody who no longer menstruates, anybody who no longer identifies as a woman but menstruates, or anyone who's never identified as a woman and never menstruated, to understand what we do and to be part of that community, like conversation in that community. Like, it's a big thing for us. The one thing I will say though is that, and I think I mentioned this to you actually, Matt, like, our policy embedded within that is this idea that we refer to people as people. I know that some charities have started to do with their language moving forward to coin people on just body parts. So things like menstruators or cervix havers. For us, we find that we discussed it as an entire team, so including our board of trustees and impartial volunteers and so on. We found that to be more dehumanizing in a system in which typically people who menstruate are female, have female reproductive parts. Like, that is going to be, it's a system that doesn't always favor them. And so we wanted to make sure that the concept was still very inclusive of their needs as well. And also, again, just ensuring that all of us exist as people and humans. And we want that to be the main thing that unites us, rather than bodily function uniting us, if that makes sense.
I think we've talked about it. I can't remember if we talked it just personally, Matt, or if it was on the podcast. I think it was just personally, but it was all about J.K. Rowling, and then obviously her transphobia that came out off the back of her tweets. Because I think it was literally, as you say, because I think it was somebody had said people who menstruate, and her tweet was people who menstruate is not a word for that, and woman, and then obviously that sparked up the. I think when we had that conversation, I was like, I don't know what she said. I didn't read the tweets. I just never envisioned her as being somebody who was transphobic.
Well, that was about whether you should read her books or you shouldn't read her books, because then Ash went out and bought a book of hers, and I was like, you can't buy a book.
we also have a separate argument about how I find it very easy to separate art from artist. But yeah, that we had that conversation quite recently. So
Fair enough. I think last year was definitely a year for art. Last year for me was like good and bad, and like pandemic aside, I mean, looking at the world of activism, like let's go back to the two things that hater said about trans rights and Black Lives Matter. I think the best things about last year was that for me, everyone was able to just stop and take a breath and really like think about things that were important to them. And I think that kind of reflection is still ongoing. And I love having those kind of reflective periods within communities that I am an activist, because it really makes you reassess like what is the goal here and like why are we doing what are we doing. But simultaneously, because we were all at home on our phones the entire time, the world of social media becomes so shouty, so aggressive, and it really doesn't always, it's not always fit for purpose in having healthy dialogue and balanced conversations about these things. Because, you know, I've got some really close friends who would say that J.K. Rowling didn't sound transphobic, like from having read all the lines of her tweets. And I've got some friends that say, yeah, she was completely out of order too. And also the manner in which she spoke, like what she said, but the manner in which she said it was really offensive to trans people. And being able to acknowledge that in a healthy forum, like it is not always easy on social media. But what I know I really aim to do is provide conversations. Like, let's have actual conversations rather than shouting matches, because that's the way that you start to help people think, but also question your own thinking as well, because you're able to receive and give information. So I think that's why I'm doing podcasts and stuff, and yeah, not just kind of the comments and the automatic retweets and anger. It's just, yeah, it's not always for me, unfortunately. Like, I'm not on Twitter because I can't bear it.
I think one of the things personally from this podcast, and you know, Matt, I think when Matt and I first started this podcast, I was a lot more right leaning than I am today.
I would like just to interrupt. So we've got someone who's listening called Jack Fossey, and he won't hear this for another 2 years. And even now, he texts me and be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe Ashley just said this," or something like that. And it just, oh my god, it cracks me up. So I've got a little list that I'm going to show Ashley soon of the things he said from 2018.
Brilliant. I can't wait. Actually, I want to know, like, what is the right leaning stuff? How would you kind of identify?
This is not the time.
Well, this is very much the time. So Ashley said, so I want you to understand, we'll talk about feminism, but what do you feel about the gender pay gap? Ashley?
Let's do it.
Right. Okay. So I argued that the gender pay gap, I don't argue that it doesn't exist. I argued that it doesn't exist purely based on gender alone.
Give me some examples as to why you would think that.
I would argue that, for example, that, you know, when you come in some realms, when it comes to getting a promotion at work, there's a personality trait that certain employers look for. So, for example, if you're getting to the high-end, high-paying roles, the personality trait I would argue is agreeability. If somebody is more agreeable, they're, in my opinion, they're less likely to be sort of not. I can't remember the word I'm looking for now. They're less likely to be the type of cunt that you have to be to raise up to that level to be at the top end. You know, in order to be at the top end, you need to be like a horrible person who just literally puts themselves first and driven by that sort of thing. And I think men are more likely to be that type of cunt and driven than women are. Okay. So I just think that's one example of other traits that have come into the factor of it's not just purely based on. I'm not disputing it exists. I'm just saying it's not the gender pay gap. I don't think is just gender based. There's personalities, there's choices, there's other things that have to come into reflection. And I'm not saying that there's not work to be done. I just don't like the label gender pay gap.
Matt, were you going to say something?
My argument was to say that when he's talking about like personalities and being agreeable and men might be a certain way, is that the issue is that there are certain men in those positions to make those decisions about whether that personality fits their business or not. And the issue is that those people need to address their own mind frames, understand why they see someone as someone who is less or more agreeable. I will say it's the opposite though, that if a woman speaks a certain way or behaves a certain way, that she is seen as less agreeable, even though she may say or do the same things or similar to a man, and that is one of the reasons why it does exist. And I think you're right. Yeah, sorry, go on, sorry.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think I'm just thinking out loud, but I think what's interesting about what Ash says is that I don't disagree with it on fact, but the reason that I don't particularly like that kind of stance, it's based on accepting the realms of reality as they are. And I really class myself as a radical feminist because that's a good conversation to have, actually. So, like, my version of feminism is radical because I want to see systemic and structural change based on what currently exists, that is a world that's defined by men and for men. Like, that's just what we see in data across the world. It's the fact that we call the concept history, not her story, or a combination of both. And I think the difficulty that you have in, especially when you use like the corporate world scenario, is that, like, do we want these psychopaths running the systems? Because the way that it's going is really unequal, not just for women, but for the rest of society as well. Like, doesn't present us with a system that is going to be more supportive of everybody and anybody. And then I also think that Matt nailed a point for me as well, which is that I think they're so, when that happens, it's not just to do with personality traits, it's to do with whether you fit a mold of a certain type of person that is already at the top. So then who is constantly making these decisions? It's the people that have already been given the opportunity to be at the top. But I've got female friends that argue with me. And actually, I was saying that to my friend James the other day. We had a debate a couple of Christmases ago when people were saying, well, I see women in boardrooms all the time. Like, I see women making decisions and executives on boards all the time. Like, there can't be a big discrepancy. And I'm like, that's fine, but I guarantee those women have come about that position through chance, because the data suggests that it's just not a regular thing. It's not the norm. You look at fields of politics, you look at fields, very, even in female reproductive health, like, we don't get the dominant say of what goes on in female bodies. So yeah, I think that for me, yeah, I'm radical in that sense. I don't want to become a liberal feminist based on systems that currently exist. And what I mean by liberal feminist is not challenging those systems, but saying, like, do what you want in this reality with whatever exists, because there's nothing wrong with whatever exists, if that makes sense.
Well, I think feminism it's a word we definitely heard growing up, say, for example, and I think that there's a lot to it. And I was talking to you before about this job that I just started recently, or this part-time job, and the person I was speaking to said that back in the early 80s, she was a feminist, and then she was a part of the feminist movement, she said, but then towards the end of the 80s, it got very white and middle class, and then less radical in some ways, and that made her less inclined to want to be a part of that. And then there are also women that don't believe in feminism. There are men, obviously, that don't believe in feminism. What is your take and stance on just feminism in general? Because do you think it needs to exist?
I mean, I do. I definitely do. And I do because I think women are amazing and we don't get enough credit for everything that we do and who we are as people. But I think it needs to exist, but I totally appreciate the reluctance for some people to want to A, identify as a feminist, but B, what does feminism actually look like for different people in different areas? Like, there's some really good papers on understanding feminism as a privilege and understanding that feminism exists differently depending on where you are in the globe or what communities that you exist in. And my friend Maya and I did an Instagram live last summer about whether the fact that even debating feminism itself, like, is a privilege, because the feminism, exactly like you just said, Matt, the woman that referenced the fact that she doesn't particularly align herself as a feminist anymore is based on the fact that the direction it's taken over so many years has been very driven towards Western, white, female privileged feminism. And yeah, it's really sad when that happens. But for me, I don't just represent myself. Like, I've never particularly worked personally or professionally in a sphere that has been purely about my needs. Like, don't get me wrong, I had pretty difficult 20s. I had a great childhood. I had pretty difficult 20s. And my 30s are getting better, but I've still got some concerns. And I think that, so I do need to advocate for myself, but it's not who I am. So it's a big part of my identity is making sure that the under-marginalised, underrepresented are people that I also stand up for. And in that sense, like, it's, again, just looking at it logically, the data suggests that Black and brown women that don't live in the West have it worse. So we're looking at like 650 million women and girls under the age of 18 being married off. You're looking at 250 million women and girls across the world experiencing FGM. You're looking at 1 in 5 women having been raped in their lifetime. So I think, like, I'm none of those women. It doesn't mean that I don't want to be a feminist, because I'm also advocating for those women.
I think all three of us, we all sit here as, in some form of a minority. And I think personally for me, when I think about feminism and any sort of movement, whether it be the civil rights movement or the LGBT movement, I personally want to strive for something that is equality of opportunity. I want every person who goes up behind me to have the opportunity, the same opportunity as the person who sits there or over there or in another school. I don't think I don't like the thought of as a black girl sitting here, she doesn't get the same privilege or the same opportunities to do whatever she can do as a white guy sitting here. That to me is what any sort of movement, like I said, the three I missed, the three that we obviously advocate for this on this podcast alone. That's what we should all be looking to achieve: is equality of opportunity. The opportunities there for everyone to grow. So I think to me, what sometimes jars me with some of the things that that make the headline with regards to certain movements is equality of outcome. So whether, for example, if we want to see 50% females in a boardroom, it's like, well, I would rather than set a deadline of saying seeing 50% females in a boardroom, let's set a target of saying, sorry, target of 50% females in the boardroom, set a target of making sure that every employee has the opportunity to grow and be there, rather than saying, so some females might want to go there, some males might want to go there. There might be pressures on males from their home to do better and bring home, traditionally bring home the money and support the family. And, it's about giving everyone the equal opportunity to do the best they can.
No, I wouldn't disagree with that on paper. I think two things that are coming to mind is, have you seen that cartoon that is, there's two different pictures within it, and it's about equity versus equality, and it's this where they're all different heights, they all get given the same box.
The box,
yeah. So that's what, and that for me is where I think the difficulty that we have is that we don't live in an ideal world where you can define oppression on paper, but you can't define how it looks physically for so many people, especially when you look at individual and community-based traumas and oppression. So I think the immediate answer is, let's do things like affirmative action. Let's put 50 women in a boardroom and see what happens, because we have to force opportunity to then evoke change, right? So that would be a radical answer. But the way that I think I like to talk about trying to convince people that there should be something proactively done is there's a really good podcast by two feminist comedians called The Debrief. They ran out of funding in 2018, so it stopped, but they've got this really good episode that's called How to Talk About Feminism. And they address the different levels of like what we mean by intersectional feminism, how you can talk generally with your mates around the pub, post-COVID times, if 21st of June happens, just to kind of encourage a nicer chat about it. And in that, they say, even having the conversation sometimes with someone is going to be really anti any change at all, because we should all be striving for the same thing and all working hard, not what you said, Ash, but someone who might think the extreme of that. And they say, like, this is how we feel, and we have to try and bring it up in terms of, we want to advocate for ourselves, but we already exist in a world where we're seen as second-class citizens. So even being able to do that and have arguments ready for ourselves to try and convince you that this is what we're worth, that is taxing as well. So, but I would recommend the podcast for anyone who wants to kind of listen to how you can think about feminism and how we feel as women trying to advocate it, but also, different ways you can argue for it, basically. And that is an example that they use about boardrooms and meritocracy and so on. It's nice.
Well, I think even feminism, and I was looking up, I'd never really looked into feminism too much, and especially for the podcast, I started looking at it, and it reminded me of a conversation I had with a member of my family a few years ago, where they thought it was hilarious that there was a male feminist. This guy identified as a feminist, and I'd never really taken it into account at the time. I didn't really have a thought. I was like, oh, I'm interested. I'm all for anyone that supports people. I didn't understand why they might do that. I didn't know this person. So when I was looking at feminism in general and why it's there, a lot of the arguments and issues about why people should or shouldn't be feminists were still the same, were very related to how I saw the arguments for why there should or shouldn't be Black Lives Matter movement and things about race. It was almost identical. It was just a different headline. And one of them was like, oh, feminists hate men. They must hate men. And I remember when I went to the protest last year, I got from people that were close to me, do you hate white people? And I was like, of course I don't hate white people. That's not exactly what I'm saying at all. And I think that's the same. That's an impression that people have potentially about feminists and why they may want to overthrow men, when that's not the case at all, I don't think.
No, I think, I mean, I can only speak for myself and communities that I'm able to have conversations and dialogue with, but I know that there will be feminists that hate men, and they'll hate generally because of the systems that exist that just benefit men. And because, I mean, it's that argument, isn't it, as well, that people say not all men, when you come down to like conversations about hashtag me too and how many abusers do we know around us and stuff. Like, the reason that we use the hyperbole of not all men is because there is not enough men that are challenging it, because if there were, it wouldn't happen. So that's the thing, like, I don't hate all men. My closest friends are male, like genuinely, like closest friends, and my dad is my absolute hero, so I don't hate men, but I do understand and empathize why some women who have been through the ringer, like, you know, on an individual level with personal relationships, as well as seeing what the current structures of the world look like, I understand why they would turn around and say, I hate men. It's also, we've got to understand as well, like, something that we haven't spoken about for until recently is like being trauma responsive as a person and as a community. Like, we react to how we've been treated. And I do, so and this is why I love what I do in prison law world as well, when I represent men and women in prison custody, because there's always a cause to an effect. There's always a reason as to why someone behaves in a certain way, whether that's explanation through environment or genetics, whatever it is. Like, there's always a reason. So if you can get to the bulk of that reason and understand it and work through it, you're going to find your result basically. So that's why I think I'm not as harsh as people and say I hate men. I hate all men, but let's just have a chat about it, basically.
I mean, men are trash. We know this.
Men are dogs.
Men are dogs. Yeah. So no, I get that. I think it is really important, and Ash and I always talk about it, but it's really important actually now for people that are without the group to advocate for those. So, and saying that men should advocate for women because they don't face the same issues that women have and have a certain privilege, and it's really important. It's always going to come down to men to deal with, not always going to come down to, pardon, that's a mistake, but men can argue for women's rights by allowing women the space to explain and teach and learn about their stories and things like that, not necessarily just say, well, it's a women's issue, so I can't deal with it, for example.
I really appreciate that, because I agree with it as well. Like, we coexist, right? So, and we're never going to get away from that. And I think it is very leveled, but yeah, just providing the space, like you said, Matt, is a really big part of it for us as well. And also, like, being able to listen without feeling attacked. And it goes back to what you said before about the issues that come through the Black Lives Matter arguments and the debates around, you are questioning my privilege and therefore I'm not comfortable with this conversation. I don't want anything to be taken away from my privilege. And you see the same thing in the lines of work that I do and the feminism that I advocate for, because I mean, that's a big thing that happened in both my representation of women in the female prison estate and women and girls and people who menstruate within my work for Freedom for Girls, because it's always men, unfortunately, just refusing to have that conversation. Like, they don't want to deal with it. Hopefully the tide's turning now. We'll see.
Well, I think it comes back to, and I think we've sort of come a bit full circle, because it comes back, to my opinion, to what you said about social media. Like, Twitter is just the worst. People just, on Twitter at the minute, or any sort of social media, it's, I'm right, so you have to be wrong. Like, there's no gray area or no wiggle room or no, like, and that's why, like what I said earlier on as well. Like, I've grown so much. I've learned a lot in the last, especially the last year alone as a white guy. But it's, and I continue to grow every day, thanks to Matt there every single day. And of course, like, people coming in and sharing their opinions like yourself. So thank you very much for like coming on and doing it with us. So
no, it's a massive privilege. Like, I love what you guys have been doing, and I know that we've cussed him out, but I'm really glad that John connected me to Matt in some way, because it's been really worthwhile, like, listening to the pod, also being here as well. Great.
We can cuss John out every single day.
Oh,
he's
great.
banned from this podcast.
I think we should wrap it up there, kind of. But before we sort of go off, is there anything that you wanted to share with everyone?
Where can people find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, because I do a few things. So I still represent mostly women in prison law settings, so prison custody, looking to advocate for their needs, access to justice, access to services. So that's a big passion of mine. So that's on LinkedIn. I do my work for Freedom Girls on LinkedIn, and also we have our own social media and website, obviously. So it's Freedom 4 Girls. And you'll see that with International Women's Day coming up on Monday, we're releasing a book. I'm so excited. Yeah.
So wait, women can write? No.
But you know what, Matt? It's funny you say that, but yeah. The book is a letter to my younger self. So what we've done is we've asked women, girls, and non-binary people to contribute to letters that they are writing to a former version of their younger selves, a former version of themselves that's younger, sorry, to give them some advice, like some much needed TLC, and just like it's going to be okay, but in very specific ways, because they've all picked like an age of themselves that needed direct advice. And the issues that we've formulated chapters from the themes of the issue. So like love and loss, transforming, being myself, and the topics are really broad, but the detail's been so fantastic, and we're going to incorporate it into Freedom for Girls' education program, so that young women and girls and other people can look at it and think, wow, I'm really stressed about this boy, but actually he doesn't matter. It's really nice. Yeah.
That's the truth. That is the truth.
Facts,
We all know that.
facts,
That was me
yeah.
yesterday. I'm writing a letter to me yesterday.
Oh,
First of
brilliant.
March. No. That's a beautiful concept for a book, I must say, isn't it? It's very reflective, and I love that sort of stuff. I definitely want to read it, and I'm going to cry.
Yeah. Oh no, do honestly do, like it's really affordable. It's going to be a fundraising arm for the charity as well. To just because fundraising during COVID has been dead, so that'll be nice for us as well. But yeah, a big thing with why I love what I do is because it's about like solidarity and sisterhood in experiences, and that rings true through all of our projects from East Africa to the UK and across the different other areas that I work in the UK. So I'm really, really excited about this book, and I will be plugging it everywhere. So get used to that, Matt, in the group. It'll be every week. Please buy, sell.
Absolutely. We'll do the same on the podcast as well.
Oh, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Tora, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, and happy International Women's Day. Yay.
Yeah. It's the women. I need more women in my life.
Yes, you do. We're amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashley, thank you so much for this lovely episode.
Thank you both. I've
Thanks,
loved it.
Ash.
No, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Really nice to meet you.
And I can't wait to go for drinks in the pubs open.
Tell me about it. I'll be the first one there, saving your pint.
I can't wait to say the actual things that Ashley said off the podcast to say you can both talk about it, because I know he would have killed me if I'd said it on here.
Ash, I'm all for it. I love these kind of conversations, especially in a pub. So let's save it. I'm totally here for it.
One thing we know, alcohol is always good with an argument.
It is, yeah. Sure.
Defo, alcohol and debates is here, like for me all year, definitely.
Have a lovely week, everyone, and celebrate the women around you.
For sure.
Seconded. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Cool. Well, Tora, thank you for. You look like you froze there. You're like, Tora, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about all that. Tora is with us again on Monday, guys, where we'll be talking about crisps. Like I said before, you can understand why Tora wins the crisp challenge and Matt loses. But you can have your own opinion. Go to the Instagram, HonestPod Instagram, and join in the conversation about what
we really need to have more females. We just don't have that many, or people that are not gay men, I would say, on the podcast, because we will learn so much. And I think learning more about the challenges and stuff that women have that are very different to ours is super, super important. And the great need for their charity and period poverty in general is something that we'll never understand as people who don't menstruate. But I can't believe that it's something that's so recent, as in this year, last year, that it's something that needs to be addressed in the world. And I didn't know this, actually, and I should have said it in the podcast, but only at the end of last year, or the beginning of this year, was Scotland the very first country to make sanitary towels and sanitary products free. And the very first country in the world, and the only one at the time to make them. So the same way that we can go and get condoms from a sexual health clinic, people that menstruate can go and get sanitary products.
Was it you that told me they're classed as a luxury item?
They had it as a luxury tax, but that ended, I think it was the year before last. Oh, I should have asked over that. But it had a luxury tier for tax.
So just pushing that price bracket up that bit more.
Yeah. But then it went down to like an essential need, and then hopefully it's going to be free and eligible for people that need them outside of schools.
People, if you have any other areas, like Matt says, we want to get more females.
Male
Can you
fees?
Can you spell it for me? I don't want to give any more attention to them. I think they have enough of a platform.
They do. No more shoehorning. No more shoehorning. No more shoehorning.
Yeah, so obviously we want to have lots of conversations because obviously the reviews that we get that fit on with our brand say that they're learning stuff that they normally wouldn't maybe learn about, which I think's a good outcome for the podcast.
Ashley, thank you so much for this wonderful episode.
I loved it.
Thank you, Tora, again for coming on, and we'll definitely share about that book because it sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it does.
And we'll see you on Monday for Honest to Pod Top 5 when we talk about crisp, chips, and dip.
And next week is our 100th episode.
Oh my God. Have a lovely week, Ashley.
Have a great one. Bye, everyone.
No more shoehorning. No more shoehorning.